Why'd they make Alucard's sword so long? It's way longer than Symphony of the Night. What's up with that?
Who cares?
Why does he have such a narrow blade anyway? With his enhanced vampire strength, wouldn't it make more sense for him to use a wide-bladed greatsword that he can swing just as fast and easily, but that cuts a lot better? How is such a narrow blade even supposed to cut at all, let alone as well as
Can you just fuck off for 5 minutes?
Hang on there. What even is that thing? And how's he twirling it so fast? He's not even moving his fingers quickly enough to be spinning it that fast.
Thanks, Alucard. Since I finished the last season of the Netflix Castlevania series, I've been looking for a good idea for a video to make about it. Now, usually when I talk about stuff like this, it's something related to realism. How realistic is this, blah this and blah that. In this case, quite frankly, I don't care. It's good enough that who cares, okay? It's so well done. It's one of the best things I've ever watched. This is not sponsored, by the way. If I end up gushing about it, it's just because it's that damn good and I liked it that much. If you haven't watched Castlevania yet, do it. Right now. I mean, after finishing this video. And if you have watched it, do it again. When I first found out about it, I was cautiously optimistic. And then after watching the first episode, I was seriously impressed, and then as it went on, I just kept getting better. Not every season is equally good, and it's got its ups and downs and everything, but overall, like the way the characters are done, the art style, the way the action scenes are done, with references to gameplay elements, it's ridiculously good. Okay. Before I keep on gushing, so what do I even want to talk about? First off, a brief comment about Alucard's sword. Yes, it looks oddly long in this series, a lot longer than it is in Symphony of the Night. Some people compared it to Sephiroth's sword. They kind of blended his standard sword from Symphony of the Night with the sword familiar, because he uses it basically like the familiar. It can move on its own, or at least he can telekinetically control it, and you can get away with a lot of things that way. I mean, if you think about Donovan's sword from Darkstalkers, that thing also acts on its own, and it's gigantic and you know, crazy fantasy shape. Who cares? I mean, if you can control it with your mind, then it literally doesn't matter. It's essentially a sort of S-talk. Or perhaps something like an Oakshot Type 18B longsword, very slender blade designed to be used against armor to thrust into the gaps, or pierce mail, etc. His also cuts remarkably well. In fact, it makes the vampires look like blood-filled water balloons, which is a little bit odd considering that they're supposed to be, you know, stronger and more durable than humans. But at the same time, it is Dracula's son. It is one of the most powerful beings in that entire world. So he can generate the kind of force needed to slice through vampires, even if it's not really as much of a dedicated cutting sword. Like, you can overanalyze it and be like, this is kind of narrow. Narrow blades can still cut reasonably well, just not as well as a wide blade. But either way, with the kind of force that he probably generates, it doesn't really matter too much. Arguably, he could use something large quite easily with his kind of strength, but it just fits his build. You know, the sword is long and slender. He is tall and slim. It just kind of fits him. It looks elegant. In the fight between Alucard and Trevor, I really like how the whip is animated, and you know, the way they move around, particularly Alucard, is very fancy. He does a lot of, you know, spinning and acrobatic maneuvers and such, which, you know, with his kind of enhanced physical ability, you can always say, yeah, sure, you can get away with it. Also, the whip covers a lot of area. I mean, this is some serious reach Trevor is obviously very skilled with the whip, and so, yeah, he needs to get away from the whip. Here's something interesting. I quite like this. So, Alucard uses his supernatural speed, and Trevor's like, wait a moment, where could he possibly go? Behind me, obviously. So he turns around and does a horizontal cut with a sword, which is exactly right, because a horizontal cut covers more ground. Now, a diagonal covers a decent amount too, but horizontal, if you swing that, it's a pretty wide arc. You're probably going to intercept wherever they appear, and this is exactly what happened, and Alucard is forced to parry that. And then, of course, Trevor has the smug grin on his face, like, ah, you can't get me like that. And then they show again Alucard's superior strength, who pushes Trevor's sword that he uses with both hands off to the side with just one hand. There's just nothing to him. Now, here's one of those silly scenes that I've talked about before, the sword bind, where they both just push against each other, and I've made an entire video about all the things you can do from there and all the ways in which you can seriously mess somebody up who does this silly thing.
Shut up.
At least in this case there's a bit of a point to it, because it was a setup for this joke here, where he, Trevor knees him in the crotch. It's just a funny thing. It does absolutely nothing to Alucard, but then the headbutt that Trevor follows up with does seem to hurt him. Like, that's painful, but getting kneed in the crotch isn't. I quite appreciate the attention to detail that they put in. Some things add a certain element of realism into something that's, of course, very obviously fantasy. And remember, realism is not a matter of black and white, all or nothing. There's degrees of realism. Here, for example, Alucard needs to block a strike from one of these big golems with his shield, so he lets go of his sword, which then just hovers next to him, and uses both arms to brace against that strike, to support his shield with that. That's a really nice touch. Even though in the same scene he's using a sword magically, he also does something that just makes sense, just as a common sense kind of thing. Use both arms if you need that extra support to brace against such a powerful attack. I think my favorite fight scene is this, against a dual axe wielding, teleporting vampire Viking. That's a mouthful. This is quite an interesting fight. Obviously, this is a great ability to have, to teleport like that. It's hard to anticipate where he's coming from. But the tactic that Alucard uses here is great. So he throws his sword, forcing the guy to teleport away. And because Alucard knows or saw where the axe went, he knows where he's going to teleport to. So then he does the shield dash, smashes him into the ceiling, but he does that attack with just his shield so he can leave his sword elsewhere, which hovers ominously behind the guy where he teleported to and cuts him to pieces. That is an awesome scene. This is not just an epic badass duel, it's also got a lot of thought put into how do you defeat something like this. You gotta come up with a good tactic on the fly, and that's exactly what Alucard did. When the fantasy fight is just right. Being a habitual overthinker, there were still moments that made me go, wait, what? Like this thing here, which is just... If you imagine how this could possibly work mechanically, it pretty much doesn't. It's clearly inspired by the chakram or chakar, particularly the ceremonial version with the central grip here. Trevor even mentions that this weapon originated in India, and it's an awesome take on the combat cross from the games. But it's not supposed to be magical, and I highly doubt it could be made to work in real life without weak links in the construction, particularly the folding mechanism. The way the different blades fold together, like seamlessly combine two into one. I mean, you could maybe come up with a way to do that, but there's really no way to control that. He just has a handle. There doesn't seem to be any kind of lever or button or any other way to control it. Like, you can't really tell what he does.
Is there a point to these questions?
Also, the way he throws it and it flies on a perfect circle. decapitating all the vampires, again, as if they were blood-filled water balloons. No resistance. There's a lot of magic humbug and hand-waving required to make this work.
Doesn't make us black magicians.
Seriously, who cares? It's a badass weapon, it looks cool in action. And that's the kind of response that people often have to some of my videos where I overanalyze fantasy and talk about how realistic this would be, blah, 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 blah. If you react to that like, what is that guy's problem? It's fantasy, it's supposed to be cool, blah, 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 whatever. I get it. I totally get it. There is a certain entertainment value in ranting about something that doesn't really make any sense, especially if it doesn't make sense within the logic of that universe. There are definitely things you can criticize in terms of storytelling, you know, if the writing is bad. Like, for example, if an ability is established in a certain way, and then a character deviates from that completely, doing something else with it that wasn't established that they can do to solve an issue that seemed insurmountable before. For example, the first time Alucard confronts Dracula and tries to stop him, Dracula slashes him with his claws and almost kills him, which causes him to have to go to torpor to recover from it. And then when they fight again, there's this really interesting detail that whenever Dracula strikes him, he always does it with a balled fist, not with the claws, which are his more dangerous weapon. So he's deliberately trying not to kill him. There are a few missed claw swipes, and he does use his claws against Trevor and Sypha, but whenever he actually hits Alucard, it's either a punch with closed fist or a push or strike with the palm of his open hand. If, on the other hand, they had made Dracula continue fighting that way and just slash him over and over again, powerfully, and Alucard had just tanked that, something that almost killed him before, and now he can suddenly take it no problem, that would be inconsistent. That would be inconsistent within the rules of what was already established, but they didn't do that. So that's the kind of well-written fantasy that I really appreciate. It has magic, it does some over-the-top things and whatnot, but it doesn't take you out of the experience. You know, it's still kind of consistent within that world where vampires and magic exist, and that's great. I have no complaints about that at all. So again, if you haven't watched it yet, by all means do so. I also recommend the Blu-ray collection, which I'll link down below. Yeah, I really like it that much, so go for it. Anyway, hope you found this interesting. Thanks for watching and have a good one.
Fuck you.